just among fun. Military science fiction podcast. Books or stories every Wednesday. Military science fiction podcast. Discussion, interviews, reviews, and rants. Military science fiction podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I think we're feeling better now. I'm still pretty froggy, so I'll try and mute myself if I cough or anything like that, but just watch out for that. All right. Today we've got a couple, we're doing kind of another scattershot show, but we think they may flow into each other. So we want to start with talking about realistic expectations of, even hesitate to call it a self-publishing career, because at this point you could be moving between self-publishing, publisher, hybrid, all these different things are
your
possible.
your author career.
Your author career.
Be a hybrid, a mutant.
Yep. And then from that, we wanted to transition into some conversation we've been having about, like, how important is prose, like the idea of prose, good prose, bad prose, like what ultimately sells, and is even selling the thing you want to think about, if that's where you're
what are the pros and the cons?
Right. So Jeff, you got the question initially. Do you want to kick it off on the pros and cons? I missed the dad joke. Do you want to
kick it off? I'm gonna tell it to Becky.
I'm gonna cough before I can laugh.
Yeah, I'd love to. And I get this question a lot, which is what made me think of the subject. I get this question all the time. And it's from well-meaning fans whom I really appreciate it, and I'm glad you think of me this way. But they're always like, when is the movie coming out? When is the TV show coming out? And, hey, I'm first one to say, I think Against All Odds would make a hell of a TV show or a movie. You think you have a good immune system, and really what it is you don't have children coughing into your open mouth. That's really what it comes down to, right?
And that has to do with you being televised how?
It's a nice question, and it's a nice daydream. We all think about it. We all think about, like, oh, who would I cast to play this character or that character? Who your favorite actors are. It's not going to happen. I mean, since 2011, I can think of 3 authors in the genre or genre adjacent to what we write that have gone from being self-published or small press published to large press published to having film or TV shows made. And that's Wool, The Martian, and Dungeon Crawler Carl. Now, I've never met Andy or the other guy.
Matt Dinneman or
no,
Hugh Howey.
Hugh Howey.
You don't meet him. He's out on his yacht.
Yeah, Hugh Howey and Andy Weir both had, like, really, like, fairy tale. Like,
and also, if I might add, Hugh Howey and Andy Weir both got into this 16 years ago.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about Apple, like, William Gibson, Neuromancer, everybody's always talking about that one. It is only now getting made into a show, which may or may not succeed.
But
and
Johnny Mnemonic was made into a movie, which is a William Gibson.
Way back in the day.
So it's like, if you got like $7 million for Wool, to print Wool, for the print publication rights to Wool, and Andy Weir was on the phone with both whoever the publisher was that ended up eventually publishing him, and the director who directed his movie. What was it?
Ridley Scott, I think.
Ridley Scott.
Yeah.
On the phone at the same time. He got ridiculous amount of money thrown at him for his book. Matt was more of a slow progression. Matt went indie first, and then he got picked up to do Trad Pub. I forget who picked him up to do Trad Pub, but then he hit New York Times bestseller.
And also Matt, actually, he had like a craze about Dungeon Crawler Carl.
For about a year before the
Trad Pub
picked him up. Yeah, it went nuts. I mean, I think I got into DCC right before it blew up. So I met Matt at a con when he could still walk around and nobody knew who he was. Now I'm looking at him in pictures, and he goes to a con, and there's like, he fills a room of 5,000 people who want to talk to him about CC. So, and they're fans, they're not other authors. So realistic expectations, you're a good author, you know how to write, you know how to tell a story, you're fairly prolific, you can do a lot in this business. I mean, look at just the three of us here and the different levels of success we've had, in our different backgrounds. I always say I'm like the least likely of person to have written a book and be successful at it because of my educational background and my disabilities. And here I am, top of my game, want to, selling like crazy. I'm still not going to get a movie or book. And the reason why is that the movie industry is based off of two things. They go off of how famous you are, which authors are never famous, very rarely famous. It's not like Castle, the beginning of the first season of Castle, where he's like signing some chick's boobs, because he's a rock star driving away in his Ferrari. No, no. Um, and how many books does BookScan show you selling in a given week? And BookScan only counts Barnes and Nobles.
At this point,
So
yeah.
If I could interject,
sure.
Larry Correia, who is
Oh, yeah.
wildly successful, has huge amounts of fans, makes
Millions.
more money, yeah, more money than we do, and has done it for a long time. His books have been optioned several times for movies, which means they give him a check for a few $1,000s and say, we have this amount of time, never made into one.
No,
And
I'm
that, and,
thinking
and
an
that,
anime series finally of Monster Hunter, but
yeah, and that
maybe.
is a series that takes place on Earth with regular people and modern day guns that you could get you could just pick
You
up
get
blank
airsoft
models,
for
and you don't have to invent them. You don't have to do like a special effects shop, and
prosthetic teeth.
all you need is the monsters, which we've been doing in movies for 100 years, and they still haven't made movies of his books because even as successful as he is, he's not successful enough.
I mean,
So
he's in certain circles, he's a household name. He has hundreds of thousands of fans. He's one of those people who, when they go to a con, he gets mobbed. I've watched people stand in line for hours and bring boxes full of books for him to sign at cons when he goes. So it is really, really rare to be at our level of success. It is 100,000 times rarer to have a movie made from your book. So don't spend any significant energy or mental time or resources, trying to figure out how to get a movie or TV show made from your book. It's like reviews. It happens when you have 100,000 reviews and you're a household name.
we know
Otherwise,
we actually know a couple who have spent considerable time and money and effort making
short
like
films,
short films based
and they're
on
not bad.
books, and they're
The-
good, but you know they haven't been picked up,
no.
Yeah.
and they got the film made.
And he was
It's
a New York
still,
Times best-selling author too. So
yeah,
it wasn't like he wasn't, and he's a great guy too. He's fantastic. We've had him on the show, I think. And unfortunately, it is a whole other ballgame. And I know we always say this, a lot of authors wanted to be directors or screenwriters. And so they got into writing books thinking that'd be the way to get their idea made into a movie. And it is, you're actually hurting yourself by doing that. If you want to make movies, if you want to write screenplays, do that. Um, if you think you're going to have your idea turned into a book and then that book will be turned into a movie, unless you're selling hundreds of thousands of copies that is verifiable through Hollywood, then it's not going to happen. And also the movie industry is on a downturn right now. It's they're not doing anything.
I mean, I've
You
seen people try to say that,
they're not taking any
Project
risk.
Hail Mary is turning things around, but I don't know. It feels, I mean, people are excited about it,
But
and that's
that wasn't a
great.
risk. I
But
mean, Andy Weir had one of the best science fiction movies ever made from his book, and not only that, but he has directors that are excited to make his movies out of his books based on The Martian.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's not like
you
that's
can't
not like
skip
the
to this.
movie
You can't.
industry suddenly
Yeah,
becoming original again.
yeah. You can't skip to part two and be like, look, he did it. No, The Martian did it. Everything after that, you can't copy. So maybe you write a book, maybe it sells really, really well and you become a household name. None of that's in your control. You just need to write the best book you can write. Don't waste any significant amount of time or
Yeah.
energy or money to anybody who tells you that they can get a movie made out of your stuff.
let's put it this way. I wrote Contact Front, and it has been more successful than anything else I've ever written, and it has been more successful than 99.9% of what anybody else in the genre will write. And I'm very grateful for it. It will never, ever, ever get made into a movie or a TV show. Just letting you know now.
I mean, it took Ender's Game 40 years to be made into a movie, and that's one of the greatest science fiction novels of all time.
And it
It's
was
such
kind
a
of a sucky movie.
fickle industry. I mean, I've got a good friend that he directed a movie that starred Chris Pine. Like his stars were aligning. He wrote and directed it. Like everything looked like it was going to take off, and then didn't take off. And you just so many stars have to align. I mean, I'm still curious if Dungeon Crawler Carl's going to do anything. Seth MacFarlane signed on. Like if anybody can do that series, you would hope it's Seth MacFarlane. But then, oh, awesome, awesome, awesome. But Peacock bought it. Oh, Peacock can't,
Wasn't there
Peacock
another
has no
guy
money.
who
They can't, they're not a prestige. So all these things, like, are they going to line up? Are they not?
wasn't
And
there another indie author who sold something called The Fat Vampire or something?
I
yeah,
don't count any of that crap though, because that's outside of our.
Yeah, but I mean,
That's like
my
romance
point
authors.
was
There's like a
that
couple of
still
romance
hasn't come
authors who
out.
sold books, and
That still hasn't come out.
I
And
yeah,
think,
that
I
was
thought
years ago.
I saw a show that I thought was based on that idea. Like he's tried to sell that a couple times,
there was
but
Do you guys remember that girl years back? I think she got started in 2015, 2016. She wrote those 120 page, 130 page vampire novels.
which one?
Oh, she was huge. Bella,
I think
Bella
Chelene
something.
Harris was kind of in that.
Oh, I take it back. It did come out. They just changed the name, so that's why I didn't hear about it. They called it
And
Reginald the Vampire because they couldn't put fat in the title.
yeah, yeah,
That's
body
right.
shaming. But the her books were just massive. I think she had like 100,000 reviews on her book one. She had like 120 books in the series at one point. I think she had ghostwriters after about the first 30 or so. But and her stuff never got made into movies, and she made millions of dollars on a genre people
Millions.
love that is really popular in movies. So, it just it's she even knows. So this is more of a public service announcement of there are people who are gonna approach you and be like, hey, if you pay me money,
Right.
I'll your book made into a movie or a TV show. No, I know everybody likes to think they're special. I like to think I'm special. We all like to think we're special. You're not. We're not.
Well, and it's kind of a common scam. I mean, even within the industry, somebody will contact you and want you to like sign the option over for a percentage of some future possible sales or something. And oh, that seems cool. But even that's a scam. And now there's so many AI scams that are auto-generating. You know, I haven't seen them in movies yet. I wouldn't be surprised if that starts going into,
But the way the scammers seem to target authors,
right.
uh,
You
like
must be
first
a
of all,
lucrative
why?
bunch
Like
of
you're targeting the audience that has no money.
right.
Yeah.
I think they're trying to target like a very specific retiree that wants to write books but
I have a friend whose entire business model is teaching retired doctors and lawyers how to write books for $10,000.
yep.
I could get in on that.
Yeah.
So,
I wish I
having
could.
said that, the step if you want to make a book that gets into a movie, the big question is then how good does it have to be? How good does the prose have to be? How good does the story have to be? And that's where we're going to segue into James's topic about
Right.
prose.
I do want to like I don't know if anybody, maybe just as a hate read, I like to read the self-publishing subreddit quite often. And the question about what you can accomplish in self-publishing comes up like daily.
I
And
got the worst review of my entire life on Reddit.
nice.
I
And
never
then I
read
got the guy to buy the next book.
Reddit, to me, whenever I think of it, I think of the line from Star Wars, "You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy."
I
This guy
know.
he really just like to the point where I'm like reading the review and I'm like, did you read the same book that I wrote? Because I don't think you did. But all I said was, hey man, thanks for taking your hard-earned money and buying my book and your precious time, away from your family to read it. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry you didn't like it. Maybe you'll like the next one. And he's like, you know what? Maybe I will. And he bought the next one. So,
King. Well, I think one thing to note about like, yeah, movies are hard, but this isn't the industry has changed a lot in the last like at this point, 10 years, I guess, that
Yeah.
there is a lot more possible than ever was before. It's just still like a lot of things, go back and watch some of our episodes on networking and not being a jerk and who as those things transition to meet people and the things you can do between, it used to be just getting on Amazon. Like Amazon breaks so many things. Like that's one of the reasons it's so hard to get book scan data is because Amazon sits on all that info. And you
Yeah.
could be selling millions on Amazon and doing very well, but it's not
Sure
going to
Loon.
cross because nobody sees those numbers.
Yeah, sure
Um,
Loon, right? I mean, he
yeah.
outsells all of us combined times 10
But
in no movie
Kickstarter
world.
was never a thing, and now people are, I think we could probably do a show on how viable Kickstarter is as an actual way if you're trying to start out. But there are so many avenues available now that were not available before.
I just
That
saw somebody on the Writer Dojo, which is Larry Correia and
Steve Diamond.
his Steve Hyman's Facebook group on writing, talking about how direct sales is the future. You hear this all the time. And the person who's talking about it is very successful. She does great with direct sales. She's amazing. It's not a knock against her at all. What it is though is that like Larry's always saying about how like you can't listen to him for how to break into the industry because it's changed so much, and it does. It's changed a lot. Personally, I think you can listen to me about how to break into the industry because I think what works is strategy, not tactics. Tactics change,
Mhm.
strategy does not. Hard work works. But what they were talking about was transitioning from instead of using Amazon going on direct sales. And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
you can do that once you're successful.
Yeah,
But nobody's out
exactly.
there browsing the web looking for books to buy on random websites.
I mean,
You
the
know,
person that I watch the most about that we know is, Jeff Chaney with Variant. And I
yeah.
thought for a longest time that if there was any publisher out there that has because they have a huge Facebook group, they have a huge kind of direct sales channel between his email news, his newsletter, like all the ways that he can directly reach these folks. And Jeff has not gone to direct sales. And I keep wondering because he still sees the value that Amazon provides in the
It-
He's
it's-
network
not going
effect.
to unless Amazon makes it impossible to sell
Yeah.
on Amazon.
yeah.
He's not going to go to direct sales, and you know why? Because direct sales is hard.
Yes.
It's not just that it's not just you have the audience, so now you can direct sale. It's a whole nother part-time job. And for Jeff, as the head of a company that publishes, dozens of books in a year, he's going to have to have a different branch of his company hire new people to handle the direct sales, and he doesn't want to do that because
No.
the more people you hire for something like that, the less your profit margin is.
And just to be clear, Amazon is not one bookstore, it's two. It's the Amazon storefront and it's Kindle Unlimited.
Hmm.
They
Yeah,
are the number one and number two bookstores in the world. And those audiences do not mix. You will occasionally get somebody who buys books on Amazon and has Kindle Unlimited. But ask yourself, if you have Netflix, how many movies did you buy last month? And the answer is none because you were watching Netflix.
well, I do buy movies because
You don't count. You're an author. You don't count.
no, it's not that. It's just that I like movies that aren't always on streaming, and I've come to the conclusion that there's a lot of movies that go on and off different
Well, some
services.
of that behavior is changing, but I think, yeah, for the
Yeah,
most part, like Jeff's people are whatever sales channel makes it easier for people to do the behavior that they have been doing. And,
yeah.
Kindle Unlimited secret sauce has been the next read. You finish a book, it shows you the next one, you pretty much click it, and they've reduced all the friction in that transaction. And that's the really difficult thing about direct sales is like once you start going down that road of looking at sales funnels and leads and how you're even getting people into the funnel and like making different offers, like you will never have a chance to sell to somebody as much as you do when they're in that funnel initially on your website. And so you got to try and make as much money as you possibly can during that interaction because as soon as they leave, they forget about you and you won't,
And
it's very difficult to make money from them again. I mean, we have a friend who is working as hard as I've ever seen anybody work to make direct sales happen for himself because he fully recognizes that it is it's scary to have one way that you're making money, especially if that's your family's main source of income. And we all acknowledge that is scary. We are in a time where Amazon is actively working to choke as many other sources of sales out. And Barnes and Noble has done a lot of moves and, jucking and jiving and maybe sells more Legos than they do books, but they're the only that's still the only other viable sales option aside from indie bookstores. And those are still down to one distributor. So
Who
there may
can
be
decide
another
not
leg.
to buy your books and tank
Yeah.
your entire line at the last second?
Yeah. So
well,
it's
I mean, he's
hard
not
right
the
now.
only one, but there is what is it, Kobo?
Well, Kobo is, yeah, you're right.
1%. 1%
Yeah,
of the
but
market.
the thing that I was going to mention, besides Cheney, there's Athon, and Athon is up for. They've tried everything. They
Yeah.
do Barnes and Noble, they do Amazon, they do KU, they do. Um, they've got like they bought, bought into this comic book distributor.
Yeah, Vault, yeah.
Yeah,
And as
but
big as they are, as
and they
much.
don't do direct sales, and they
Yeah,
show no inclination to ever want to do direct sales
yeah.
because they understand how much money and time in man hours it would cost them to do it.
It's not. It's not like you can do both.
No,
Once you put your book on a website, you can't have it on KU.
right.
Yeah.
So you are taking you're it's an either or situation. So you are going to say like, okay, I'm making $10,000 a month off of KU. I'm going to get rid of that to try to make $500 a month on direct sales
Yeah.
because it's guaranteed. It's cutting off your nose to spite your face until
Well,
there's some sort of viable option. Otherwise, that's
yeah.
And
really KU is the way to go.
honestly, people talk about, oh, well, what happens if Amazon, gets rid of KDP or KU? And I'm like, well, they're not going to get rid of, they're not going to like destroy it. If they get rid, they'll sell it, you know, and because it's a business that makes money, and if it doesn't make enough money to attract Amazon's attention, it'll attract somebody smaller's attention, and as Amazon will sell the infrastructure that went with that, and you'll still have Kindle Unlimited, and you'll have Kindle Direct Publishing. Just won't be through Amazon.
And even if they
Well,
got rid of KU, then people would just go back to buying books the way they used to on Amazon because they're
they'll
not going to
never
stop selling books.
they'll never get rid of KU because like notice that Amazon didn't get sued for scraping a whole bunch of books, right? Because KU is one of the largest sets of new data for Amazon like AI that they can sell. I honestly think that that is like a revenue stream, or not necessarily a revenue stream, but a resource for them that they're not broadcasting that much. That all of even the AI generated stuff gives them data sets to compare A/B test against, like what a human made versus an AI made versus how it sells, so they can start seeing those things and use that in other parts of their business. Which
I've
maybe
wished for years that they would give us the data on
right.
when people stop reading our books. It would just be
We,
such.
we are we are going a little far afield from
Yeah,
We
yeah,
actual
are.
yeah. Yeah,
pros
back to
here.
I
pros. Back
The
to
only thing I
pros.
want to end on is that we are in a time when, as a writer, I think there are a lot of options, and that's what I think people miss on like the subreddit is there a lot of things are possible if you put in the work, but you got to put in the work,
It's a
But
lot of work.
yeah, but more doors are open now than ever have been. But
Yeah.
let's talk about the thing that will, like, you could put in a whole lot of work on a terrible book, and that's something to realize is like what what is terrible. I think a lot of the messages that get out to people on, and I was trained as a reporter, and so putting way more work into like how tight writing should be versus actually just telling the story has been a blockage for me that I've had to get past. And that's why I kind of think about this sometimes. We live in a time like KU, you get paid the more you write. So actually there's an incentive to write more versus writing less, like if you have to pay for print, which is even the cheapest now it's ever has been. Um, but it's a struggle then to like self-edit to make sure you're not like Matt Dinneman will write. My biggest criticism of him is that he'll repeat words in the same sentence, and I just wish that an editor would have fixed that for him. But people will complain about prose and they forget about story, or if they forget about the broad appeal of, okay, you're saying this is bad prose, but a million people liked it, so
What
you
Does
can
something.
objectively,
in my
yeah,
opinion, the most important thing that you can do in genre writing, and I think this has been shown over and over, is create characters that
yes,
engage people. And the story is secondary behind that. The quality of your prose is a distant third behind that. If your characters draw people in, then they will read your books over and over. The same series. They'll keep reading one book after another. It's been shown like I don't mean this as any kind of slight either, but Backyard Starship. I mean, Terry writes great stories and great characters. The prose is, I mean, it's good, but it's not like, you know, literature level.
what is good
But
prose? Let's
but
debate that.
no, but it's not like on the level of, something that would be in an airport bookstore. But it's characters. Everybody loves his characters.
Yeah,
They love
Come
Van.
for
They
the story
love,
and they stay for the characters.
yeah.
You know,
They love Van. They love that. I'm blanking on the name of the robot bird, uh, but they love those characters, and they're always posting on his Facebook group and Discord and everywhere, talking about those characters and how much they love them and how what they want to see more with them. And that's the key in genre fiction. If you don't create characters that engage people, you're not going to get people who keep reading your books. They won't keep reading the series. Drop Trooper was so successful because everybody loved Cam,
Hmm.
you know, and it's not because everybody loves battle suits, although a lot of people do. And it's not just because everybody loves, you know, ground fighting between battle suits and aliens, although
I'm
a lot of
hoping that's why it is. My new series is based on that.
but it's you got to have somebody who the readers can crawl into their head and find it comfortable.
Yeah, and and there's a lot of ways to do that. Like Jacob Grimm is like this really like you look at him and you're like, wow, I want to be like him. He's amazing. He's this, and it's not because of what he can do. It's because of how he behaves. And with Cam, it's like everybody could feel like Cam at one point or another. They're just trapped between a rock and a hard place with no good decisions, and they just do the best they can. And Cam's great that way. And so it's like you have um your pilot. I can't remember his name. The pilot in World War Mars. He was really great too. Um,
Um,
I really liked him,
you're talking
and
about the guy who was like
he was romancing the chick, and
the ring captain.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
what was his
really, yeah.
name?
You do great characters. So the thing is like you can have like the world's greatest pros. Like Rebecca, my wife. She's not only a cover designer who makes amazing covers. She's one of those, I've said this before, she's one of those people who just like everything artistic comes naturally to her. And she has amazing prose. So when I first started writing, she kind of looked at my writing and was like, you know, and it's okay, kind of thing, because my prose is not, I'm not Hemingway, I'm not Faulkner. And I did get better over time, obviously, because there is a level of prose that is required for you to succeed. It just varies by what you're aiming for and what your audience is. But her prose is beautiful. I mean, like her for her, the written word is poetry. And
I think
I read her book, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like
we should
I
differentiate
wish I could write that good.
too
Jason
that
Lee, by
Eat
the
you
way.
though.
there's pros that
What, Rick?
Jason Lee was the guy's name.
Jason Lee, yeah. Like for me, bad when I think about bad prose, like I'm like if we're gonna, objectively, it's writing that actively makes it hard for you to either understand what's happening in a scene or with a character, like to really understand what the character feels, to see it. Like if you're giving conflicting information about a thing as a like if blocking doesn't make sense, or
You're
to
using the
me,
same words over and over again.
yeah, to me
Uh,
that's bad prose. And but equally, if I've got a writer that just really loves the smell of their own farts, basically, and is giving like really confusing metaphors, confusing descriptions that they think are great, or like they're just in their own way. To me, that can really. But then also, I think a lot of literary fiction doesn't want to give the whole story. Like it hides. Like I love Hemingway as much as anybody, but he really wants like people came to expect or think that they would read between the lines and a lot of things that he was doing. But those are making assumptions about the story, right? And like the reader can make assumptions, but I think especially in genre, you got to be as clear as possible about what's happening. Like in science fiction, if you're not as clear as possible to the extent that you understand what's happening and why the characters are doing a thing, because you're making up so many rules about the place and the situation and why they're doing the things they do, I think that's what leads people to put something down. If they
I
don't,
think you can only have somebody have to reread a sentence
right.
one or two times before they stop reading your book. And you can have really elegant, beautiful prose that is also clear and like because when we're editing, right? I don't know about Rick, but I know what I do is I'll go through and I'll just right click and start finding synonyms for words that I overuse
Hmm.
because I've overused them. And sometimes I'll end up with a synonym that is like two words with the same, was it alliterative? Alliterative?
Alliterative. Yeah, well, like if you're
Or
repeating
like
sounds
where
within the
you
sentence.
know, raucous, rapid,
Right.
whatever, and I'll be like, oh no, I can't do that because I just did that with some other letters. And so there is like a certain level of awareness of your prose as you're writing to like, okay, I don't want to use the same complex word over and over again within the same paragraph because that becomes repetitive and because it becomes repetitive, it stands out. And all these things come into what good prose is. However, good prose, because it's somewhat subjective, you have a lot of people who think that their prose is much better than it actually is,
Mhm.
or that prose doesn't matter. And it does matter. It just isn't the most important thing that you need to worry about when you're writing. Character, story, prose. It's like a three-legged stool. And you can have the best prose in the world, but if your story and character sucks, nobody's going to read it. You have the best characters in the world, but if your writing is unintelligible and your story is nonsense, nobody's going to read it. Um, is that to say that you have to have the best story, the best prose, and the best characters? No, you have to have good enough on the prose and the story. If your characters are really good. If your characters are mid, then you need to make up for it some other way. But if you're gonna put like if you have to put a priority somewhere, put it in making really good
Well, and
characters.
I'd say clarity
I
too
think
in
that when it
describing the
comes to,
character. Like if
Yeah.
people understand what the character wants or who they are or why they're doing what they do, like that is, I think, objectively bad because they're not going to connect with the character.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sorry, Rick, I cut you off.
so I think that when you contrast conventional literature and trad published, especially literature, with what I would call more pulp style, which is what I do, um, that the characters become more important in the pulp style. That when you get in trad literature and trad publishing and literature, it's it's to them it feels to me a lot of the times like the story is more important and the prose is more important, and they don't try to give characters that really involve people. A lot of times they make characters that you hate or actively dislike, and they get a lot of awards for it
Hmm.
because for some reason that's what literary critics want. But when it comes to actually selling books to people who read a book a week or a book every 2 weeks, they want a character who they can identify with and root for. They don't want a character that they don't like, that they don't want a character they hate. They don't want a character that
I can tell you why that happens too, though. It's because the gatekeepers for traditional publishing are not readers; they're the editors, and the
I
editors
mean they
read
do read, but they're very
dozens of
selective.
books. You know,
Well, they also often come from a specific pipeline of places. Like
those are
I,
well, like, they read dozens of books a week trying to find the one they think will sell, and they get tired of good characters. They get tired of characters that are, what we would consider a likable, interesting, character could admire. They want to go for the do you like deeply flawed humans as your main characters thing because for them, they want to see how far that flaw can go.
But
Like somebody who
that's
can't
like
eat a cheeseburger because they reviewed too many cheeseburgers. Now it's got to have you know snails on it or something.
that's like the trad fantasy publishing where they say, "Oh, we've had too many medieval fantasy that are like Tolkien with orcs and elves and dwarves. We want something different." Well, that's what they want. The readers still love medieval style fantasy with elves and orcs and dwarves. They want to read more of that. They just want good, maybe a little bit different. But
mhm.
Yeah.
but the,
What
the
do you always
editors
say? The same but different, right?
yeah, the editors don't want it because they've read too many, but they're not the ones who pay our salaries.
No, no. Our gatekeeper is really basically comes down to it is the reader, the person who buys
Mhm.
the book and reads it. Do
I
they
would
like?
say, well, that's one of the biggest changes in the industry. Like even going back to the original, conversation is like it is so much easier to get directly to the reader now and what the reader wants. Not trying to figure out what the reader wants. Like an editor would make a decision that might be right or wrong, but now that's the writer really, if you put effort into it to try to figure out what the reader wants and give them what they want.
And
Um,
if
Well,
I
it's
could
more important for
interject,
us because with an editor, they can go to their company and be like, "Hey, I think this book will be really big. Let's put six figures behind marketing it and make sure Barnes Nobles puts it on the end cap, and boom, you have a success." You can
maybe.
manufacture it to some degree. We can't. We
Mhm.
solely have to go off of does a reader like our book?
Well, they're
Yes, sir.
doing that less and less too, but yeah, that cancel happen.
If I might interject, if you are a writer trying to get into this and you are hanging out in places where other writers hang out, remember they are not your audience.
Yes.
Don't
And
try to
neither are
impress.
you.
Don't try to impress other writers. Try to impress your readers.
Yeah. And that really and that all boils back down to what genre are you writing in? Because you got these writers who feel like genre is just this sort of like, oh, it doesn't matter, you just write what's in your heart, blah blah blah. And that's great if you aren't interested in making money. But if you're interested in doing this for a living, you got to know what your readers want. And you know what your readers want by what genre you're writing in. And when you're if so for instance, say you're writing you want to write sword and sandal or sword and sorcery, you don't have to really worry too much about your about the prose being overly complex or flowery or pretty because that's not what they're there for. They're there for the axe cleaving the skull in half. You know, if you're writing literary fiction, then yeah, you need to worry about what does this metaphor say about the human condition? You know, how many words can I use to describe this leaf falling from a tree? That kind of thing. So it really, what your reader wants comes down to genre. Now, of course, we're talking about sci-fi because we write sci-fi, right? And we know what sci-fi readers want. And so it's for us, it's a little bit easier. And if you want to write in sci-fi and military sci-fi, it's really easy to figure out what readers want. It's super easy. Go to Google and type in top 100, Amazon top 100 sci-fi, Amazon top 100 military sci-fi. Don't count anything that isn't military sci-fi. So if you see like a bare-chested guy on the cover, it's not military sci-fi. If you see Taken by an Alien, it's not military sci-fi. If you see a large chested woman on the cover, it's not military sci-fi. Just look for the military sci-fi. Look for the ones that have over 1,000 reviews. Read those. Look at the reviews. What do people like about it? You know,
And every now and then I'll read a book that has a ton of reviews and I'll just be like, why was this successful? And that's a learning point for me because maybe I bounce off it or I'm like, man, this is hard to read or this prose is hard for me and then I'll try and figure out like, well, what was it about it that worked well? Was it the scenario? Was it the character? Was it there? Because somehow they obviously, unless they're buying reviews, which I think is less and less likely on Amazon, but um,
Columbus Day is like that for me.
yeah,
I really enjoyed that book right up until they introduced the AI, and that's everybody's favorite part. So
hmm.
clearly, that audience was
Which book
looking
was
for
that?
something that I wasn't. Columbus Day,
Columbus Day.
Oh,
Wilson's, Skippy the AI. Um, so clearly, that audience was looking for something, and they found it in that
hmm.
book. And so, if you want to do something like that, then you know where to go for your audience. I like a more not realistic, but more grounded, more human conflict, more human nature, characters, which is why there aren't any aliens in Against All Odds, because I wanted to focus on the human relationships and humans dealing with, conflict in space with all this technology and stuff. I didn't want magic alien AIs to come in and, basically control everything. And so you find that audience by looking at what people are reading. And then when you find the thing that you're like, okay, I love this. Like if you like Galaxy's Edge, which is, Nick and, what's that guy's name?
Jason.
Jason's idea was,
Yeah.
what if you had stormtroopers in a galaxy with no force? If you like that idea and you read those books and you love those books and that's something you want to write, then you write that, but a little bit different. You don't try to take that and go, okay, now what if they were all women and they talked about their feelings all the time and, it was about the relationships they pursued and it was slice of life and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden you're in a completely different genre,
Hmm.
and whichever genre you pick, whatever subgenre you pick in, that's where you figure out, okay, what kind of prose do I need to be successful in this genre? And I have a Venn diagram on my Twitter which is like what you love, what you can write, and what sells. And that's where the what you can write comes in. Because if someone said, hey, from now on with military sci-fi, the prose has to be a lot more like Faulkner in order for it to sell, that would be a problem for me. Like I I would have to step up my prose game to a point where and I'm already going slow at a book a year. It'd be like a book every 3 years because that's a skill that I don't know if I could achieve easily to increase the complexity and
I think you're
metaphor.
selling yourself short. I mean, Faulkner he's complicated, but he's just I don't know. I don't think it's as
Well, I
difficult
mean,
as
traditionally, I say Faulkner, but traditionally, it's
yeah,
Faulkner and there's Hemingway, right? There's
yeah.
Faulkner is the prose guy, Hemingway is the concise guy. And most people lean toward Hemingway. They want Hemingway style writing.
I don't like Hemingway.
Well, I don't either, but um, the when I say most people, I mean like literally speaking. Like if you talk to anybody and they give, "Well, be concise and blah blah blah." I am not. I mean, I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm between Hemingway and Faulkner. Um, but if I had to make my prose pretty, it would be
Hmm.
very difficult for me and increase the amount of time it took to write a book. But I don't because I write military sci-fi.
You don't have to. I mean, there's a happy medium there.
Yeah,
Right.
oh, yeah.
You don't have to be pretty, but you also don't have to be basic.
No, no, you don't. You probably can't because
I mean, you
again,
can. People have been successful doing it. I don't like it. Uh, and if I were forced to do that to succeed, I might not be able to be
that'd be just
successful.
as hard as stepping it up. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like stepping it down would be just as hard as stepping it up because I don't know how to step it
I mean,
down.
some of that style, like the best style, my favorite stylist in, I guess, more cyberpunk science fiction would be Walter John Williams. And I think maybe some people might see that as kind of a barrier to some of the things that he's writing, but like voice is a thing we haven't talked about. Clarity of like all these things start playing together, like with how the fiction to me, like how the prose feels as you're reading it. Like, do I get a sense of like what this story is like, what these characters like? Did the writer really think about how the character is viewing this story, and is that reflected in the way the story is told? To me, that like elevates it from basic to something that's more interesting to me because you can kind of tell when a writer like they didn't think about point of view, like they were thinking about point of view in terms of like the character is a flashlight or whatever, a camera looking at what's happening, but they didn't think about how the character interprets the events through themselves as they're experiencing whatever's happening in the
And
book. And
a lot of what I have perused, not read deeply, because once I get this, I don't read it anymore. But a lot of what I've read that I think was written by AI, that's its major failing. Because you can go through and probably correct a bunch of crap that AI does wrong, uh, but you can't get it to get inside the head of your character. You
right,
can't make it talk with the voice of your character.
You can make it talk about the way the leather of the character's coat whips around every 5 seconds, or
Yeah, yeah,
whatever little detail you told it to focus on about your character, it'll repeat that endlessly.
yeah.
But the thing that makes books books is the internal monologue, not what they're doing or what they're seeing. Someone told me this once a long time ago, and it made so much perfect sense to me. The plot is what happens to the character, stuff that people see. The story is how they deal with it.
Yeah.
right,
How they deal with it starts in here.
This
You
is
know,
gonna this is going to be a little bit um, frivolous, but sometimes when I'm like taking a break, I will play around with AI, and I'll do what I'll do is like
me too.
write me a sequel to the 1985 movie My Science Project.
Is
and
that the one
like
with where they make the doll come alive?
the what?
Is that the one where they make the doll come alive?
No, it's the one where they find a UFO engine and it makes this time warp and brings in dinosaurs and stuff into the high school gym. Um,
That's one I
anyway,
haven't seen, I don't think. Okay.
it's not. Yeah, it's not out on streaming. But I loved it as a kid, and I just thought about it, and I'm like, uh, yeah, I wonder if they had made a sequel, what it'd be like. So I'll go like on Copilot, and they'll say, what would a sequel be to this movie be like? And it'll write it, and I'll like, okay, write me the first chapter of the sequel, and it'll write it, and I'm like, yeah, this tells exactly what happened, but I don't know what any of these characters is thinking.
I mean, yeah,
mhm,
AI is really good for telling you what happened and how it happened. Sometimes it's emotionless. And the
Yeah,
thing, and the reason why so many writers are using AI is because they think that why people are reading books is because they're trying to visualize it in their head what's happening. And really, and I know this sounds so esoteric and so, foo-foo as a writer, but our goal is not to recreate something that's happening for someone to see in their head. It's to make them feel
right.
something while they're reading it. And I will die on this hill, but the entire reason I am successful, not the entire reason, the other 50% of the reason I'm successful beyond my covers is that when someone got to the end of the book, they felt something. And because they felt something, they remembered who I was and they wanted to read the next one. And otherwise, it's just a book that they read to fill the time and they don't remember anything about it.
I mean, science
And
fiction,
honestly,
hopefully,
people make a living off those kind of books,
yeah,
so
yeah.
let's not underestimate that.
I mean,
No, no, no.
that's the
There's a
thing
place
about
for it.
science fiction. Hopefully, that like you have broadened someone's thoughts in a different way, or have imagined a future that is cool, or thought about the world in a different way. But if they don't feel anything, it's like Greg Egan. You know, I love Greg Egan, but if you haven't read like Axiomatic or Diaspora, I think but he's a physicist who writes science fiction, and he's very highly regarded. You will read his books and just be like, "What? I can't think about this six-dimensional space." But the characters, just you finish it and you're not thinking about the characters. You're thinking about the world building he created.
I
You
read a
know,
book like that once where it was about this guy it was like a Doctor Who kind of book. And this dude ended up being like at the end of the book, you end up finding out he's a ghost and inhabiting his own dead body. And it was interesting. And his ideas were interesting. He had a lot to say about Islam and the suicide of the West and stuff like that. But his characters were flat and boring and meaningless. And when one of them died, I was just like, oh, she died. I guess she shouldn't have like gone out on that date with some rando. It just was like, and there is a place for the action adventure Mac Bowen-esque books where it's just, you know, I put both barrels in his chest and pulled the trigger, felt nothing. There is a place for that. I mean, I write Wraith, Superhero by Night, and she kills a lot of people without really having any kind of emotions about it whatsoever, because they're all bad people, and why should she have emotions about killing bad people? And so there absolutely is a place for that. And so what I'm talking about though is like we're successful because we move beyond that. And there are people who are successful who do that. I just don't know how long they're successful for or
mhm.
where they'll be in 15 years. I still want to be doing this in 20 years. God willing, I'm still alive. I still want to be writing books. I still want people to know who I am. And it didn't start off that way. It started off just wanting money, but it turned into something where it was like I would write a book. I got like the 4 Arsenal books, and people were still like, "Well, can you do a recap? I can't remember your last book." And I'm like, "How can you not remember my last book?" You
Mhm.
know. And that's when I started to figure out I needed to do more of making people feel things. And once I started doing that, people started remembering the books, and sales picked up, and obviously Against All Odds is hugely successful compared to my superhero stuff. Um, and you really have to work to make that happen. You can't just accidentally make people feel things in a book. You know, well,
If
you
you do,
can.
you'd have to figure out why you
You
did
got
it.
to be able to repeat it.
I know
You got to be able to do it on purpose.
a lot of literary science fiction, particularly from the 70s, 80s, even before that, they did concentrate more on world building than they did on characters or even plot. I mean, there's a book that I read back in the 80s by Philip Jose Farmer called Dark as the Sun. And I read that over and over. And the only reason I read it was the world building because the characters were two dimensional. The story and plot was basically just we're wandering across the world, going from one meaningless adventure to another in order to hopefully get to some way to off out of this universe because the universe is dying. Uh, and yeah, it had no plot. The characters were utterly unmemorable, but it had this world building, and that was the big thing back then. There had so many little details in the world, and you're like trying to absorb everyone. But that's a different age and a different audience, specifically a much different audience than currently is the audience for most uh, space opera, military science fiction, uh, all the different subgenres of military science fiction. It's a different audience. They want different things out of it. And besides the military and science fiction trappings, they want memorable characters.
hmm
So, and they want secondary to that, they want a plot that goes from a beginning to an ending with a clear route through there, not this meandering thing where you have meaningless
Side
encounters and
stories,
adventures.
subplots, and
Yeah.
side quests, and the And the thing is, like, some people could look at that and go like, well, they did it, so I can do it. And that's just not actually true because we're not in that time period anymore.
No, we aren't.
We're not pioneers. We're not pioneering anything. We're not inventing new genres. Nobody's coming to us for the first time they've ever heard of this idea. You know, I'm writing these ground infantry armored infantry stuff, and my editor was like, hey, so this is kind of like Halo, right? And I'm like, yeah, well, it's on purpose because it's part of it's an homage to Halo. I love Halo, and I don't feel like anybody really writes that kind of space opera, military sci-fi mashup with aliens and since you stopped writing drop troopers, there's not really a lot of armored powered armored books around. But the other part was is like it doesn't take place on a halo. It doesn't take place on a Dyson sphere. It's not on a ring. It's not like that was the big thing about Halo, right? Was the Halo. It's like Ringworld. The big thing about Ringworld was finding out about the history of the Ringworld and how it worked. Nobody is coming to my books because they've never heard of space travel before. That that
That
that
reminds me
moment's
of
past.
my agent that I had way back in the late 90s. Uh, when I sent in my first book, Duty on Our Planet, uh, the first editor was not a science fiction editor. And she sent it back saying, maybe you ought to redo your plot because they have faster than light travel. Maybe you ought to just have a book that deals with all the ramifications of having faster than light travel. I'm like, so I called the agent and I was like, somebody needs to tell her that's been done.
Yeah. I mean, it's like watching a movie by a director who's never directed that kind of movie before. You end up with really cliche motorcycle chase scenes and really boring fight scenes because we have seen them all. And once you've seen them all, you can't just keep redoing the same thing. You've got to do the same thing but a little bit different. It's why like The Bourne Identity was so revolutionary when it came out was like all of a sudden you have two people on screen trying to kill each other. There's no quips, there's no jokes, there's no stopping to say the cool line because that was the thing in the 80s, right? Was like, everybody freeze, or crap
On
like
the other
that.
hand, sometimes you get people who've never directed an action movie before who nail it on the first try, like Captain America: The Winter Soldier with the guys who did.
Yeah, but they had though.
No,
They
they've
did,
not
they
done
did
an
the
action
paintball
movie. They did
episodes in
TV.
Community. And
Yeah.
if you'd watched the paintball episodes of Community, you would know that they could direct action. But
One
but
thing I
yeah,
want
no,
to
you do occasionally
say
get that.
when it comes to like callbacks, like I want to write stuff like the 70s. Like I think you got to remember that like this goes back to who is your audience? Who is your reader? Like if you're trying to write to somebody who is in their 60s, that's fine. That's great. In fact, that's a big part of the Kindle Unlimited audience, quite honestly. Um, but it's something I think a lot about is like, okay, I'm writing military science fiction. A lot of my experience is the global war on terror. But, one of the particular hives of scum and villainy on Reddit that I like to read is the Army subreddit because I'm really curious about things that current day soldiers are experiencing. And it's really funny to me when some guy pops up or gal pops up and it's like, I'm a brand new soldier and I'm worried about X, Y, and Z, or my NCO did this, or should I worry about that? And it's like, nothing changes. It's all the same. Like certain things might change, but then other things are all exactly the same, and
The
so
more things change, the more they stay the same.
yeah, exactly. But I think that is you got to remember you're not writing to people in the set, from the 70s. You're writing to people now, hopefully, because that's the audience that will sustain you, thinking about doing this 20 years from now. Um, and a lot of people sometimes have come to, we talk about prose as well. People aren't coming to science fiction in some cases from other science fiction. They're coming from games, like Jeff's talking about. They're coming from
True.
movies. They're coming from comics, manga, anime.
All of
They
those good
don't,
RPG readers are coming
yeah,
from
they don't have the same
games.
All of them.
background.
They don't
You
read
talk
anything.
about world building, like you got to be a little bit like, hey, that's been done before, but also I maybe need to ease you into this, but not just assume you know these things, but also don't assume that you care about it because, yeah, this was done. Maybe I think you experience this story this way, but you don't actually. You're used to an info dump at the beginning of a game during the tutorial, and you're totally fine with that,
Nobody
So
needs to be told though the ramifications of faster than light travel. They've watched so many
no,
movies
I
and
think that
TV
one's
shows
a
and
pretty
games. They're
egregious.
like
Yeah,
they accept it as a given in most of them.
no, and Yeah, I think that one's a weird example of like a person that shouldn't have been editing that at all.
Well, I mean, we all had those cranky editors who have given us like really bad advice, and we're just like, listen, I clearly know more about this genre than you do. Maybe you should be editing my books. And that comes down to like you, the author, need to be well read in your genre. You need to understand why your genre works the way it works. Because if you don't, then there isn't going to be anybody who can tell you that you're doing it wrong. And there are wrong ways to do it. Because you're just going to assume that there are no wrong ways to do it, and that's always a bad place to be.
We
So
should
if you're
probably
writing
do another
military
show just about
sci-fi, you need to have read military sci-fi. We've covered that before. Like you need to read the genre. You need to read all genres, but you really need to read the genre that you are writing in. Otherwise, you're writing in the wrong genre. If you don't enjoy it,
I'm really going to write the romantasy that's going to kill it, man. I'm telling you, it's happening.
yeah. I mean, obviously, writing from a place of I hate this crap with every fiber of my being is definitely the way to go.
I'm going to write the good one, and then I'll
It's like
retire.
lit RPG. I can't. Like I love reading it. I read a lot of it. I would love to write it, but everything I write ends up being too character centric. And the lit RPG readers all tell me the same thing, like, "Oh, well, you spend too much time on this or that," and I'm just like, "It's just not the genre for me to write in." You know, as much as I like the ideas and the way it works, I'm gonna stick with military sci-fi where I get to write these really cool, awesome, heroic characters who, live and die and people feel like are real. And that's kind of where my bread and butter is.
We got 2 show ideas out of this as we wrap things up. Like we need to do a show about editors. I don't think we've done that yet. Like
No, I
No.
don't think we
experience
have.
working with editors. And then also, should we write in other genres? And have we thought about that? Because we've all thought about it and
Yeah.
what everything that goes into that. Like maybe I really should be a mystery writer and I just don't write mystery.
And listen, if I could get a part of that thriller money, I would be all
Right.
over that.
Yep.
But
I
I
really
worry
want to write
again,
that.
write too much character stuff and not enough bang bang basic action
You
stuff.
can change them, Jeff. You can change them.
I really want to write that clean Amish cyberpunk romance.
Yep. So thanks for hanging out with us. I mean, I'd love to hear. I'm always curious to hear what other people think about prose because the way that I've been programmed to interpret prose could be totally different than the way you've done it. And so I'm really curious of like what's important to you, what's not, what have you bounced off of and why. I think that's all useful stuff to know. Yeah,
And I
Jeff.
just want you all to remember, unlike every other author in your life on Discord and Facebook is going to tell you, there is a wrong way to do things. Just bear that in mind. Everything you do is not just some snowflake golden egg coming from the goose and you're just perfect. Nobody is that way. Nothing works that way in life ever.
And like
We're not
every single other person on YouTube, I'm going to tell you to smash that like and subscribe button and share
we're not
this.
trying to sell you anything
Same but
today,
different.
so all right. Well, thanks for hanging out with us and we
I'm
will
trying
see
to sell you on hard work and blood, sweat, and tears. It
exactly.
sucks.
Cheers. All right. Later.
Got to teach her to salute.